So hi everyone, thanks for joining us today. I'm very excited about having this conversation and sort of informal roundtable discussion with everyone on the topic of Zionism and young European Jews. I'm Ilan Selby, I'm the policy officer at EUGS, and I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of young Jews from across Europe, each from sort of a distinct background when it comes to their involvement in various different Jewish youth movements. So joining us today, we have Laura Cazes, the Advisor on Organizational Development for the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany. Ilya Trubman, the Director of Bnei Akiva Operations in Germany. Alex Volshtein, a graduate of Netzer Olami and Madrid FSU. And last but not least, Olaf Stando, a current board member and Vice President of EUGS. So thanks everyone for joining. And before I begin, I'd really just like to emphasize that the plan is for this to be, as I've said numerous times already, to be very informal and to give you guys the opportunity to contribute, ask questions, give your own thoughts and insights as and when you see fit. So let's start. Perhaps I could begin by asking the panel to briefly introduce yourselves and the main points and experiences that have helped to influence and form your Zionist identity. So Ilya, can I ask you to begin then?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi. So my name is Ilya Trubman. I'm 25 years old. I am the CEO, the Managing Director of Bnei Akiva in Germany. And I got in touch for the first time with Zionism. That would have been, I think, on a Machane in Bad Sobernheim by the ZWST, where we had a Piola. I mean, I knew at that point that Israel to some extent exists, right? But I didn't know so much what Zionism is about and what it means. And there it all started. And then through going to the Jewish communities in Germany, going through Madrichim education and so on and so forth, I got more and more in touch and involved with Zionism. And I think like the real big Zionist breakthrough, if you want to call it this way, was when I went on a gap year program by Bnei Akiva in Israel, where the whole purpose is that it doesn't matter where you come from, who you are, that you can find your place there because you get to know Israel from all the different perspectives. You are working in a kibbutz, you are doing hasbara seminars, leadership seminars, you're going to a yeshiva, you're serving for 2 months in the IDF, doing your tirunut, that would be basic service, stuff like that, you're volunteering. So that was a very Zionist breakthrough because everything I learned on the Machanot about Israel, I finally could see for myself and actually experience.
That's great. Thanks for the introduction. And perhaps if I can pass over to Laura, if you want to go for it.
Yes, sure. Thanks for the invitation. Yeah, it's interesting to follow right after Ilya, because we were, if you want to talk about the general way we were Zionistically informed by a youth organization, we have a pretty similar background. And I, like in my real life, not on Zoom, or currently also on Zoom, I work for the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, and that runs basically the biggest summer camps in Germany that that Jewish kids from all over the country go to. It is not a youth movement, and I think that's important to say if we talk about Zionist education, because it doesn't really follow one strict agenda in terms of saying, okay, so we are like Bnei Akiva, we have a certain way in which we educate our chanichim, our children that go to the summer and also winter camps about Israel. It's more about a general awareness of Jewish identity in the context of a connection to Israel. Yeah, maybe something about myself. As you said, I work for the Central Welfare Board of Jews in Germany, and I'm the advisor on organizational development there. But I'm also a former board member of EUGS, and therefore I am really happy about these spaces because, and this is also what brings me to the point that I'd love to discuss with you guys, is that, and it's a great place at EUGS to do that, to really talk about the way we ourselves as young Jews define our sometimes maybe even complicated relationship to Zionism, and really find a space where we can be open about how we feel about certain things with regards to our own Jewish identity. I'm really excited about that. Talked a lot, sorry.
Not at all. Thank you very much. That's really interesting. And now I'll pass over to you, Alex.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Thanks for the invitation too. And like, my Zionism experience started from my childhood because I studied in Jewish school in a unique establishment in Belarus. It's a governmental Jewish school in Belarus. Maybe it's unique for FSU, but I'm not sure. I know that there's only one in Belarus of its kind in my own city. And like, when you are 3 years old and you come into a building and you see two flags, flag of your own country, Belarus, and flag of Israel, and when you sing a tikva, when you study Jewish culture, Hebrew, and history of Israel, there is no way you want to become a Zionist. It's hard not to become. And after all of this Jewish background and Zionist background, my school was affiliated with local Jewish community, which then led me to become a madrich and also to educate other people and youth in the former Soviet Union, which also led for building my own Zionism, my own view of that, because when you educate someone, you educate yourself as well. And yeah, that's how all this Zionism thing for me started. And I haven't chosen it, but I'm glad that it all came that way.
Great, Alex. Thanks for sharing that with us. And Olaf, I'll let you then make your introduction.
Great. So thanks for the invite. It's awesome to be here, and it's great to see a decent turnout as well. I know that we do lots of these webinars, but I think especially talking about Zionism in the present age is really important, and it's something that we as EUJS wanted to do for a long time. We wanted to open up more platforms to really expose the diversity of views that exist within the Zionist movement, and to really show that we're not just one kind of universal voice. There's many voices among the movement, but that makes us stronger, and I think that's really exciting, and I can't wait to sort of hear from you and hear questions. But about my journey, I suppose I never went to Jewish school, so I was never really in the same sort of journey as Alex. I was never really part of a youth movement either, because in Scotland that's not really a thing. My reform shul in Edinburgh was aligned, there was a group that was aligned with Hashemah Zayir. I suppose I was always a kind of Hashemah type, but I was never really a member of Hashemah per se. And my first contact with Zionism was when I went to the Savash International Camp in Hungary. I was a madrich there 3 times, and I was a hanech 4 times. So I spent 7 solid summers among Jews from America, Israel, and the Eastern European countries that got sort of liberated. And for those that don't know about the camp, it was established in the 90s, shortly after the Iron Curtain fell apart, and it was basically about reconnecting Eastern European Jews that didn't know much about Jewishness to what Jewishness means, and giving them a chance to meet other sort of fellow young Jews from all over Europe. And Zionist education was a big part of that. So every day there would be workshops about kind of what Israel means, and that would be via the medium of like discussions, and be arts and crafts and theatre plays and all sorts of stuff. We got to meet some former IDF soldiers, etc. So I suppose, I was about 12 and 13 when I got introduced to the very idea of Zionism. I never really thought about it much, and I didn't really feel connected to it until I started uni. And when I joined university, I was involved in sort of left-wing politics in Scotland and the UK for a while. I was a member of the Labour Party for a while, and something that we might be talking about later, given obviously the massive anti-Semitism crisis that we had in Labour in the UK. But I got involved in Zionism by becoming a student leader on my campus. I was leading a JTOC in Aberdeen, and basically we often had workshops, platforms for discussion. We've done a lot of outreach work with the Palestinian activist group, which had its challenges but also rewards. And yeah, I got more and more interested in the sort of political aspects of Zionism, as well as the community. I became more and more involved in UJS. I started going to Summer U and different UJS seminars, and I suppose that started my sort of journey in that front. So yeah.
Great, cheers, Olaf. So perhaps I can just say again at this point, for those of you that have joined in just quite recently, the plan is for this discussion to be very informal and give the opportunity to participants to ask questions, give their opinions, insights. So if you're comfortable, feel free to turn the camera on and make it a more personal experience. If not, that's totally fine. And yeah, just feel free to ask questions throughout. To begin with, I'll start by saying at EUJS we recently launched the Theodor I A campaign, launched on Yom Ha'atzmaut, a campaign designed to showcase the plurality of opinions on Zionism that exist in the diaspora among young European Jews. And I'll speak about this campaign more a bit later on. But perhaps my first question to the panel, so to speak, is what do you make of the current discussion on Zionism and the current understanding of Zionism both within the Jewish community and at a societal level? Would anyone like to speak on that?
Sorry, maybe that's the question of English language, but I didn't really get the question. Could you please
Sure, I'll repeat it. Yeah, so I guess what I'm asking is, what do you make of the current conversation and dialogue that surrounds the term Zionism, both within the Jewish community and also at a more wider societal level? Ilya, on you go.
Go on.
Yeah, you can also if you want.
No, you can go first. It's fine.
So as someone who was studying in Germany at different universities and going to school in Germany and then moving to the Netherlands and kind of having this dual experience, I think that the perception of Zionism in the society is a little bit hostile often. People either don't know what it actually means, or when you out yourself as a Zionist or even as a Jew in some circles, then you get some hostility and you get all those misconceptions like, what do you mean Zionism? Does this mean that you hate Palestine? Does this mean that you are racist? Like all those misconceptions and stereotypes could really come out when you say this term. But in the Jewish community, I personally, at least in Germany, had always the feeling that it's quite a diverse discussion. There, from my experience, the people don't even necessarily call themselves particular Zionists, but they still would support some Zionist values. They would still support the state of Israel. They would at least the bare minimum know about what is happening more or less in Israel. But the discussion inside I also experienced as a quite critical one and a very diverse one. There were voices from all over. And I also have the feeling that this is the same case in the Netherlands, where people inside the Jewish community with each other over a beer in a non-formal but also in formal settings would speak a lot about what Israel means for them. And there you have all the different opinions coming together. But I always have the feeling that it comes from a point where you are actually speaking of love towards the state of Israel and of ways to improve it from your perspective, not necessarily from a hostile position when I talk about the discussions inside the Jewish community.
Thanks for sharing, Ilya. As well, I just want to apologize, Miriam, I didn't give you the opportunity to introduce yourself earlier. That's totally my fault. Perhaps you want to say a few words on your experience and how your Zionist identity has been formed?
It's basically like I grew up in a Shomer Tzair in Rome, and I started going to a Shomer when I was 9 years old. And then last year I went on Shnat, so I did a whole year where I also had the opportunity of meeting people from different movements, because in Rome we only have Shomer Tzair and Bnei Akiva, so it's usually more about only those two options. It was really nice to get to meet people from different movements and to get to experience Israel in a different way for a whole year.
Great, thank you. And apologies again for that. Olaf, you were wanting to speak on this question.
So I guess it depends on what space you're in, and Zionism has sadly has become a political football. It's often become ammunition to use against those that you disagree with. It depends what space you're in. So for example, and I'm talking about the UK here, right? If you're on the left, increasingly in the past few years, Zionism has become a watchword for potentially being someone who's against Palestine, who's racist, who's no concerns for human rights. And I've experienced that being in university spaces and places like NUS, my student council, being a Labour Party, etc. And that's a big challenge that we have to fight, and we have to redefine the image of Zionism to make it look more acceptable and to show people that this is not the case. Within us as Jews, and particularly sort of young Jews in the diaspora, those who are leaders on campuses, I think Zionism has often come to mean having to defend Israel, and Zionism increasingly, in my view, equates with Israel advocacy, right? And basically, this means, you know, standing up for Israel when it's being unfairly attacked in the UN. It means, you know, showing that Israel is a democratic state and that we're proud of it. But it also often means having to defend the Israeli government because nobody else will. And there's a sense of responsibility on us from those within Israel, but also others within the Zionist movement, that we have to be that kind of pillar of defense. I personally don't think that should be our role. I think we should be a constructive friend to Israel in the diaspora, and we should be guiding Israel the way we want to shape it. I'm not saying that we have as much of a stake in building Israel as those who live in Israel, because, you know, I'm not making Aliyah, and maybe that makes me less entitled to speak about what's happening in Israel. But I think this is a home for all of us, right? Israel is the Jewish home. And I may not be a citizen of Israel, but I still have a stake and an interest in making it the best country it can possibly be. And obviously, we all have very different views on what the best country means. You know, those on the left have very different views to those on the right, etc. And the political circumstances at the moment define the views that we have. But I think what's really exciting about this campaign is that really we get to take Zionism into our own hands. We get to define it the way we want to, democratically. We get to open up a conversation. And rather than just accepting alt definitions of Zionism and labels that are put on us, we get to sort of shape what it means to us. And it's a conversation that's long overdue. And yeah, I suppose there isn't one simple answer of what it means. To me, the bottom line is Zionism is about defending Israel's right to exist and standing with Israel when it's being sort of unfairly attacked, and being proud of the achievements it makes, but also being critical when you have to be.
Miki, go for it.
Yeah, thank you. I also, just to let you know, I have to leave shortly, so I'm gonna ask a common question, and I hope to hear a response, and then I'll have to excuse myself. I wanted to ask all of you about the spiritual and theoretical side of Zionism. You know, there's certainly elements of advocacy and personal experience with Israel, but there's also a very rich theoretical and intellectual and philosophical and spiritual side to Zionism. So, for example, in Bnei Akiva, the ideas of Rav Neria and Rav Kook have shaped Bnei Akiva. When it comes to Shomer Tzair, Olaf Stando, there's also other forms of Zionism that are not very political, like Echad Ha'am, Berdichevsky. And the reason why I'm mentioning all these names is not to name drop, but to, first of all, ask you, are you familiar with these names? You know, for many young people, for many students, you're constantly engaged with different perspectives, you're reading different content. But I often find when it comes to Israel, and when it comes to the ideas that shape both historical Zionism and also contemporary Zionism, many young people are not aware and are not engaged with the text and the ideas. So the question I wanted to ask is, what is the work that's done when it comes to engaging with theory, not only historical, but also, for example, there's fascinating discussions today about post-Zionism. You know, what does it mean to be a Zionist when you already have the state? Or, for example, there's interesting religious thinkers that have departed from the ideas of Rav Kook, like Rav Shagar, and many others. And I'm just curious, what is the engagement on a theoretical, spiritual, religious level with thought?
Thanks, Mickey. Laura, go for it. Yeah.
Yeah, Mickey, that fits actually really well in what I wanted to say before, because, and what you just asked also reminded me of that. During my term in the board on the board of EUJS, we had a general assembly during which the assembly was able to kind of decide via policy whether EUJS is a Zionist organization or not. And that kind of brought us into a very weird situation, because while EUJS had always had a very solidary agenda towards Israel, and of course an agenda that would also involve advocacy or would involve travels or seminars in Israel, the question of whether EUJS is a Zionist organization or not was even highly disputed within the board. So we were super nervous about giving this decision to the General Assembly, because it was absolutely not in our power to shape that. And this brings me back to what you just asked, Mickey. This probably also, and while Ilya, you said it, yes, there is a discussion about Zionism within the Jewish community, but in the same time, it is our understanding of Zionism is never informed by the same thing. So while there is no, I would say that there is a, minimum thing that people would agree on within the Jewish community on what Zionism is the right to Jewish self-determination in a nation. But beyond that, it becomes pretty unclear what Zionism is for most Jews. And I'm only talking about the young ones, the politically active ones that already have kind of found their personal, at least a space in which they want to think about this. And we're not even talking about cross-generational discussion, where we often experience that elder people do not like young spaces in which Zionism is critically discussed. That's at least the experience that I have had several times. And at the same time, we have a lack, and this is where I would agree, Mickey, on sources or our own channels in which we inform ourselves with the way and with the diversity beyond there is political and cultural Zionism, because it often doesn't apply anymore to the realities we have nowadays. We have a far more complicated situation. We have a situation in which many young Jews, progressive Jews would say, I'm critical of the concept of nations on a general level. How does that apply to my Zionism? What does that mean? And at the same time, I have a personal biographical history that is deeply connected to the state of Israel. What do I do with that? So I would agree on that there is a lack on, and that is of course also shaped by the fact that we're constantly asked to either identify or distance ourselves from Zionism, that we don't look for our own sources that would actually enrich our knowledge, our feeling, and also our identity the way that feels comfortable for us and not for majority society, and also maybe not for the Israeli society, because the feeling of Zionism as a diaspora person is a different one. Yeah, and therefore I would kind of agree that we need that more, that we need more source-based and also dialogue, inner Jewish dialogue-based discussion on which kind of definition of Zionism we can agree upon that gives space for diverse opinions.
Great, thanks, Laura. Alex or Miriam? Yeah, Alex, feel free to.
Yeah, what I heard from you, Laura, is so different from what we have here in Belarus, because for us now here, cultural Zionism is a thing. It's like something that most of Jewish young people in Belarus are agree with, because I do not want to move to Israel, but still I'm somehow affiliated to Zionism. I do not think that concept of state is something that I don't know. I just don't want to think that what is this for me. Usually that's an image of some young person here in FSU, and still cultural Zionism and theoretical Zionism, spiritual Zionism, the Zionism which connects me in some other way than Aliyah, is like something which is very actual for nowadays FSU.
Thanks for that. And Miriam, would you like to add anything on the current discussion on Zionism from your perspective?
I feel like it's different in different parts of Italy. Jewish community in Rome is very connected to Israel, and there is very much the feeling of going to live in Israel and having this kind of relationship to Israel. I still feel like there is still a lack, as of what Mickey asked, there is a lack in the Roman Jewish community about different sides of Zionism and different ways of thinking of different Zionist thinkers. There is very much of usually a one way. And I feel also like the importance of youth movement is to give like the youth movement perspective. Because probably if I didn't come to a summer, my views of Zionism would be very different. And the same would be for a person that came to Bnei Akiva. And I feel like, it's not a very big community. It's a very historical one, and there is a strong feeling about Israel, but there is a lack in educating towards different sides of Zionism so that you can find like the one that is most appropriate to your own identity and to your own like way of approaching Israel. And I feel this is where like youth movements can give a big approach, but also like something we should really like open more in the community and have like more events or more opportunities to discuss different sides and different ways to approach Israel that is not just, loving Israel without any opportunity of criticizing it or shaping it the way that we want it. I feel like this is the conversation that we should have more.
Absolutely, thanks for that. And on that point, absolutely the regionality of...
I just want to say goodbye, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. I'm sorry I have to leave early. I'm very inspired by all of you. Hopefully you will continue to cultivate a language that will be able to manifest, the next stage of Zionism, because you guys are not only consumers, but producers in the future. So I'm looking forward to watch the rest of the video later. Have a Shabbat Shalom and stay healthy and safe.
Shabbat Shalom, Miki.
Bye.
But absolutely, Miriam, that's a very good point on the sort of regionality of Zionism, and where you sit determines what you see at times. And yeah, absolutely, I agree. I wasn't so sure that it was very different even within Italy, but it's a good point to raise. Ilya, you wanted to mention something just before?
Yeah, exactly, about the question of the intellectual, the spiritual debate when it comes to elements of Zionism. So many people would think, yes, Bnei Akiva, you guys are religious Zionism, case closed, easy, right? But for me, when I became CEO, when I took over the role in Germany, it was for me actually very important that we give our Chanechim and Madrechim ownership of this ideology. That means that we don't go with a predetermined set and tell them, so this is how it's gonna be, but that we actually open up the debate and hear their opinion. And we try to make this over our shlichim, where they had events in their mamash, in their salon, like in their living room, where we had also bigger events. It's formalized in the Veida. And I must say that I was myself very surprised how lively the debate became. And I'm personally really, really happy that it's not only Bnei Akiva that is debating it, but I think it's also other youth movements. I think it's also non-youth movements like the ZVST. I had so many debates with my friends who grew up there. I mean, Laura can attest for sure. And I think that as long as it's not really formalized, that the debate is missing. But I do feel that we have more and more the will of the people to actually engage into what Zionism means, what affiliation Zionism means beyond the very basic consensus that Israel as a state should exist, and that's the homeland of the Jewish people.
Thanks for that, Ilya. Yeah, William, go for it.
Hi, thank you for organizing this. So I want to come back on what Olaf and Ilya said a little bit and what Laura said. I'm happy to hear that some of you seem to have said that there is room for debate. I personally don't know if I can agree with that. So I mean, I just feel like Zionism is the default we grow up with. And I think the argument that we don't live in Israel is very valid. And I'm like very respectful of that personally. And I think like people who live in the diaspora should like listen to Israelis' experiences and like take it for what it is and the fact that they are not there. And that being said, we're also not living under occupation or living under lockdown. And so I think we also owe it to listen to voices whose narratives see like the state of Israel as essentially having destroyed their own attempt at liberation. And I'm also very concerned that you guys, you talk about it, Israel advocacy. It's like asked of the Jewish community and diaspora to advocate for Israel. And I was listening to a webinar yesterday, and there was a former admiral from the Shin Bet who's been active a little bit in the peace movement in Israel. And he said, it's unfair. He doesn't get to vote in the US, and yet what the US administration does has a direct impact on his life as an Israeli. And like much of that comes from our efforts as Jews in diaspora. And I think that's great. I personally consider the foundation of the state of Israel as probably the greatest achievement in the 20th century. Like, it's just to think that the Jewish people have been able to create a state of their own after being arguably the most persecuted, objectively one of the most persecuted people on history, is just like, it's a wonder. And so I would, just for that, consider myself a Zionist. I'm very concerned, though, that an aspect of what is Zionism today is religious extremism, is religious fundamentalism. And I also think that I can understand somebody who's not a Zionist. I don't think you as a Jew who's an anti-Zionist, like that automatically, means you have a self-hate kind of complex going on. And so my question to you guys is, what do you think should be the voices of Jews in diaspora and Jews in Israel, they also exist in Israel, who don't define themselves as Zionists? And what do you think of the trouble of religious extremism within Zionism?
So thanks for that, William. I'll just come on to that and sort of follow up from what Laura was talking about, that UJS General Assembly. As some of you, I think it was 2 years ago when UJS became a Zionist organization constitutionally. This is now sort of #1 in our constitution. And I was sort of one of the louder voices that was against UJS becoming a Zionist organization. Now, that's not because I didn't consider myself a Zionist at that point. I have always been a Zionist in terms of, believing in Israel's right to exist and right to thrive. But at that point, I struggled to openly identify myself as a Zionist. That was partly due to, kind of being a Labour Party and being, having the struggles with what the term means and really having been demonized as a Zionist for many, many years. But also because at that point, 2 years ago, it felt like Zionism has become overtaken by, religious fundamentalists and hard right nationalists, and the debate increasingly has become so narrow that people with left-wing socialist views like myself just weren't really welcome in the movement. That changed since then. I completely support UJS being a Zionist organization because, well, that was the democratic decision, right? I mean, that was what the delegates have decided. I welcome that. I think it's great. And it's kind of a shame that it took us 2 years to really start discussing what Zionism is, because we should have had that conversation at that point or even before. Because my experience with leading young Jews on campus in Aberdeen, and also being involved in leadership of a student union that was one of the more left-wing student unions in Scotland, was that we don't really have the understanding of what Zionism really means. And Yeah, so I suppose what's really important is to just not shut down the spaces, because if we define Zionism as a narrow kind of ideological position or as a narrow duty, if we define Zionism as purely a duty to stand with Israel, whatever it takes, be the sort of another arm of stand with us, we're going to shut a lot of people out, and we're going to be more exclusive. And that's not really good for us, because we need to have more people on side to defend Israel. And to have as many people on side, we need to reach out to as many people. And we also don't want to cultivate an image of ourselves as a fundamentalist kind of radical orthodox movement. I think we should be grounded on human rights and on self-determination, right? Really, the two founding principles of Zionism should be standing up for democracy, justice, equality, exactly what was in the founding principles of Israel when Ben-Gurion founded it in 1948, and standing up for the idea of self-determination. So not just for us Jews, but self-determination for all people who have these struggles. So for the Kurdish people, for example, for the Palestinian people. If we believe in a two-state solution, we should also be fighting for the right for Palestinian self-determination. And many other cases like that. That could be Uyghurs in China, who have also struggled to find self-determination for years and have been shut out, etc. And just going back to the religious element at this point, it is really a big issue, because obviously Israel is constitutionally a Jewish state, and every strand of Judaism should be allowed to thrive. And there's nothing wrong with the ultra-Orthodox community like standing up for themselves and having their own parties and stuff like that. But I think what is wrong is allowing one part of the Zionist movement to hijack the whole movement. And that's why we need to have these regular discussions and conferences and debates and whatever. Yeah, that's it.
Thanks,
Laura, I saw that you were...
Yeah, I'll pass over to Laura right now before perhaps posing a different question.
Yeah. Also, because I wanted to refer to something Olaf said. I agree to most of the things you said. I think one thing that I think where we make a mistake that majority society already does enough is to parallelize religiosity or orthodoxy with the right-wing nationalist extremism there is in Israel. So while we should be aware, and I agree with that, that there is, for many people on the progressive spectrum, there is a real conflict, an inner conflict to identify with policies and politics that align with this kind of agenda. I think we should be aware, also for the sake of our inner Jewish diversity, that orthodoxy or a religious approach to Zionism does not automatically mean extremism. And that because there are a lot of movements in Israel, and we should acknowledge the diversity there is as an argument for ourselves in the discussions we need to have all the time anyways, that there are religious and Orthodox branches that are not neglecting human rights and that are in favor of a diverse society of two states. So that is something that I would like to point on, because I think the mistake or the things that we often neglect is the repertoire of diversity that we actually have when we look at this kind of situation. And also, the second point I want to make, referring to you, William, is that you're right in the sense that I can relate to it really well, because while I was active as a madricha, and then that's the interesting part, I was far more left-wing leaning than I am now. And what I wanted to do is really incorporate that kind of, also rage and conflict that I had, while at the same time wanting to all with the interest of giving my chanichim their own approach to Israel that is informed by many different things. But I did that by saying we also need to look at it critically. Today I would be a bit more, I I would like to look more at or what I do nowadays is try to look more at the environment that we as Jews are in. And oftentimes the problem is that there's only a certain amount of spaces in which we can discuss. And in some of these spaces we discuss as Jews. And in some of these spaces we discuss just as people that are interested about, or that somehow have a relationship towards the state of Israel in one way or another. But those are very limited spaces. That's a very limited amount of spaces. And what we neglect oftentimes is and that's something that, that Olaf and I have been discussing a lot, is how much does the hostility, while being progressive, how much does the hostility that we experience in many progressive spaces towards the state of Israel frame the way that we approach Zionism? How much space do we really have for our own personal, conflictful and difficult establishment of a relationship that is sometimes not possible to explain? That is also not always a collective Jewish experience to us, because it's difficult to identify with someone in the family who's just being racist, but you have those people in the family, those kinds of people. But so it's sometimes also a personal process. So which are the spaces in which we can actually freely develop that without being influenced by the fact that, oh, you're a Zionist, but you're not. I mean, it's okay that you're a Jew, but you're not a Zionist, right? And all of us know these kinds of questions. So how much does that influence the way that we position ourselves really, apart from the discussions that we should also have about human rights?
Thanks, Laura. I'll just, perhaps that leads us onto a different part in the discussion, then I'll give the floor to Miriam and Alex, as well as anyone on, Ephraim, if you just hold on 1 second, if that's possible. I'll come to the floor in just a minute, and just after giving Miriam and Alex the opportunity. Yeah, and going on from what's been said from Laura, William, Olaf, and Elia as well, there is a clear polarization in the discussion. You're not given an opportunity to speak at times, perhaps, as to your views. You mention a part of your identity, and then immediately your identity is framed in the person's mind already that you're discussing with, equally on the right and the left. Yeah, it's important to be critical as always, and to try, I believe, like particularly Olaf and Laura were saying, to widen this space and to shut out the polarization and sort of objectification of your views based on small elements of your identity. Miriam, you had your hand raised a second ago.
Yeah, thank you. I feel like basically what we should try to do if we're in an educational space is help people find their own connection and personal connection to Zionism. And I agree with Laura and also a lot of things that Olaf said, that also like growing up in a summer, one of the artists, the thing I found the artist to connect with was usually Zionism, and I could combine like my own personal belief, like political belief, and my political identity with my version of Zionism, and how a summer would fit into my version of Zionism. And I feel like, we should give like options and ideas and have people share their own experiences. And if they feel like Zionism is not for them, maybe, so tell them that there are different ways of looking at Zionism, and that there are different approaches that they can take, and they can find their own approach and find their own identity. They should just not need to conform to what the community says or what their family says specifically. I feel religion and Israel is a very complex matter to speak of, because also there are many in Israel, ultra-Orthodox community that they're not Zionist and do not vote or participate politically in Israel, and they're also like a minority. And so also as Zionists, how we should try to also understand ultra-Orthodox community that are so far away maybe from the reality that we live on, and also like their relationship to Israel and why they're not Zionists. And I feel like religion is a very complicated matter. And there's also this aspect of like very religious community that do not participate in, in the political aspect of Israeli society because they are not Zionists. They should also like consider and educate on. About what also what Laura said, it's very hard to have like any kind of conversation about Israel, maybe at university or in a school, because it's usually very polarized that if you're a Zionist, you agree with everything that the state of Israel like says, and everything that the government of Israel says and does. And I feel like usually our personal approach to these kind of discussions is basically just trying like to nuance the situation and show that there are many points of view and many sides to Zionism that are usually not aware about, but it's a very complicated matter. And it's usually like a lot of it that I find is usually like, if you're a Jew and if you're a Zionist, you agree with everything that Israel does or says. And it's usually just saying to them that it's not like that. You can also be a Zionist and criticize Israel and then your own progressive identity, and at the same time, believe in the self-determination for the Jewish people.
Sorry for interjecting for a second. I just wanted to update you all. We were just Zoom bombed, as some of you have mentioned in the chat, and we took care of it quite quickly. It was also the first time that something like that ever happened in our UGS web sessions. We are unfortunately by far not the first Jewish organization to whom this is happening, and we are now being extra careful, but everything should be fine now. We have a waiting room enabled. We will be very careful who else can enter this meeting from now on. But this is happening, and unfortunately anti-Semitism is also a reality in the internet, although that brings me to the next point, and which brings me back to the debate, which I really enjoy about this debate, that this debate and this instance has actually made me realize that has been more or less completely free of framing Zionism through the scope of anti-Semitism, which I think is super important and which I think doesn't happen too often, especially in our European conversation. So really thanks for that, and sorry for interrupting, and let's get back to the interesting discussion.
Thanks, Bini. So Ephraim, I'll let you speak at this point, and then Alex, I'll perhaps come to you afterwards.
Yes, thank you. So one thing I wanted to tell the participants, well, most of you are leaders in Jewish organizations, and I am not. So this puts me obviously, wait, this is a bit, okay. This puts me obviously in a very different position. So I'm going to say stuff that I feel it's not necessarily relevant, to pedagogical education. But one thing that has made me very uncomfortable is the idea of speaking of an identity of Zionism, which translates into action as advocacy. And I'll tell you why. Because in my perspective, and I'm not diminishing the importance of advocacy, and I've worked with UGIS, I saw how important it was. But for me, the first question we have to take care of is the inside, education of what we think of Zionism. And I was very happy that William, you brought it up. So here's the thing. There's very big difference between, okay, I'll just say it differently. Zionism as a belief in the right of Jewish people to have a homeland is something that anyone in the world can believe. A person doesn't even have to be Jewish. A person can even not know a thing about Jewish history and believe in that idea, and they can be Zionists. For the Jewish community, there's something very different. It's what I'd call my grandmother's Zionism. That is, the centrality of Israel in the Jewish life, which it is not only, and I would say even mainly not, the physical land of Israel. It's what Israel represents to us. And there is this idea of Ahavat Israel, loving the children of Israel. These aspects of, I don't even call that Zionism because it existed way before the idea of Zionism came along, are things that are particularly Jewish. And I think this is what the education, what the emphasis should be put on education. But unfortunately, what I see, in my own experience, what I see is that we have in the education for Zionism the heritage of the arrogance of colonialism, which was at the root of the idea of Zionism, which were basically, and today we can say it, we're Jewish, we can still say it, that let's say the winners among the Zionist founding fathers were very racist, and not only to Arabs, but even to Jews who came from Arabic countries and other countries. So I seem to what I think I'm seeing today in Israeli politics and all of that is the heritage of that Zionism, as opposed to another Zionism. And I urge you to read, for example, the letter that Albert Einstein wrote for the opening of the Hebrew University in Jerusalem. And he said, the nationalistic frenzy is important, but it's only important now because we need to build a country and then we have to get rid of it. There's a Jewish author that I love called Joseph Roth, who lived in Austria, and he wrote during the 20s and 30s, and I'm going to finish with that. Sorry, I'm taking too long, but it's a whole train of thought that I've developed. So, and he wrote a book that's called The Wandering Jews. It's a terrific book, and he speaks about the Jewish identity, and for him, the founding of Israel is a tragedy. Now, he believes that it is necessary. He says precisely the fact of it being necessary is tragic, because Jews, he has a message that Jews are carrying a universal message. He has a whole theory about it, but here you have people who do believe in the idea of Zionism, like Rabbi David Buzaglo, who came from Morocco, and he came there, but for him, Arabs were also human beings, and he'd never thought of developing that arrogance that, unfortunately, I think did, trickle down to the education in many movements where it's, we are right. And the education about Zionism is not as much about Israel, the land of Israel, people of Israel that we love. It becomes a thing that anything that doesn't go in the direction of Israel, is wrong and is basically a not nuanced view of Zionism.
Thanks, Ephraim, for that intervention. Alex, would you have anything to add either on this point or something that was said previously?
Yeah. I just remember at this point that just before the session, I just wanted to recap the history of Zionism and entered Zionism, just the word Zionism, in Russian YouTube. And every single link I saw in YouTube, it was something like Zionists want to kill all the Arabs, Zionists want to kill all the Russians, and so on and so forth. It's just, it was really hard to find some information, like nicely done information without some fundamentalism and so on and so forth in Russian segment of the internet. I'm not really sure what about the English one. On both of the sides, like some parts of those videos they were made in a really strange way, like demonizing the Jews and Zionism, and like it showed me that an extremism exists in both of these sides. I'm sure that there are Zionists who believe that there should not be Arabs, even though I haven't seen one. Also, I haven't seen any anti-Zionists who believe that Jews should be gone. And what I led to, I've heard a line which is still fixed in my mind from William, which stated that what should be the voice of anti-Zionist youth in Europe. And I just think that I haven't ever participated in conversation with someone who's anti-Zionist without anger, without some fundamentalism from my side and other person's side. And for now, after this line, I understood that this voice should be just rational and without any fundamentalism from both sides. That's just something I want to say.
Thanks, Alex. As well, before Immanuel, I'll go to you in a second, but if anyone else from the floor would like to add something, please either send it in the chat or raise your hand on the screen or through Zoom, whichever. Immanuel, I'll pass over to you.
I find it very, excuse my English, I think it's not so advanced like the ones of you guys. I would like to add to that in my opinion, it is very reasonable nowadays to consider yourself as anti-Zionist. I just for this discussion, I consider myself a Zionist, but it's very easy for me to see the other perspective, to understand why one would not agree with all of this, because this is for me the most important thing, also connected with my youth organization, because the definition of Zionism has been abused throughout the years and throughout its time. The Hashomer Hatzair considers itself as a Zionist movement, but we never have to be defined as the Zionist definition as it is now. You never have to define yourself as what other people think you are. This is for me a very important thing, and this is why in every discussion, when I often already had discussions with organizations like the BDS or something like this, you can never forget that what they think of you is not what you are, and it will never be. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Immanuel. I'd just like to, William, I see you with your hands up, and Ilya as well, but I'd just like to give anyone that perhaps hasn't spoke the opportunity to do so. If you do, feel free to signal. Okay, I can cope with that silence then. Ilya, I'll pass it back to you.
Thank you. So what I often hear in debates about Zionism, also inside the Jewish community and outside, is that it often gets intertwined with racism, and then people come along and call up some incidents of some people who did something racist, said something racist, or were racist themselves, and also happen to be Zionists. I personally think that racism and Zionism has nothing to do with each other. I don't think that Islam is a terrorist organization because some Muslims happen to be terrorists. And the same thing, I think, applies to Zionism, because there are some people, or there were some people in the broad spectrum of Zionism that were also racist. It doesn't mean that Zionism is racism, or that it has anything to do with that.
I think that's a great point that you make there, Ilya. And I think the problem is a lot of the time when those from the far right, especially, and we've seen that in Europe with Viktor Orban's party and with the Austrian far right and the AfD in Germany, when they embrace Zionism and they start waving Israeli flags at their conferences and, you know, start chanting anti-Muslim slogans while, you know, claiming to be defenders of Israel, this is when it gets dangerous to not oppose them. Because if we as a Zionist movement just don't stand up to it and say, well, this is okay, there's a diversity of opinions there, you know, whatever, and they're standing up for Israel, so we're just going to be silent about this. This is when people start to equate, you know, Zionists with racists in the far right. I'm not saying that making that equation is a justifiable thing to do, because, you know, I'm a Zionist, I have nothing to do with those far right movements. But I think what's really important is for us to say racists are not welcome in our Zionist movement. The far right isn't welcome in our Zionist movement, because Zionism was founded exactly to fight the far right. And Israel came out of the ashes of the destruction that the far right has caused in Europe. So, and I'm proud that UJS has been doing a lot of work on this, you know, and Yodasida in Germany and many other organizations have really taken a stand and showed that some of these pro-Israel advocates among the far right are just not kosher, and we have to stamp them out from our community. And I think what some of you have said about sort of anti-Zionists, I think a lot of the time there's just a lack of understanding on what Zionism is, because the debate between Zionism and progressivism has become pretty polarized. You know, because there has been such a vacuum in discussion and there's been no space to debate our differences within Zionism, people have often been forced to choose between being socialist and Zionist, for example. The point is of discussions like we're having today is to really show that you can be progressive, you can be Zionist, and you can believe in Israel while also advocating a different image of Israel that we want to build. So yes, I think it's really important basically in our conversations, in our platforms, to include those who are anti-Zionists and to engage and to listen to why it is that they're anti-Zionists and Jewish. You know, what led them to this position? Because we can either turn them to being Zionists or soft Zionists, or we can at least understand what motivates them so that we don't make the mistakes of alienating people and creating more division. So, yeah. Thanks,
Olaf. William, I'll come to you before going to Miriam, Laura, and Alex again.
Thank you. Sorry, I just wanted to clarify something the question I had asked based on what Alex had said. My question was specifically to anti-Zionist Jews, right? So there are Jews in Israel who no longer believe that the state of, who from the beginning might have been against the state of Israel, who just see Zionism as whatever racist entity, or who just themselves believe like, that's it, the time for two states has passed. We need a one state solution, democratic state that is no longer a Jewish state. And there are Jews outside of Israel that believe the same thing. So I just wanted to clarify that my question was, what do you guys think like the role should be for anti-Zionist Jews within like the Jewish community and listening to their voices? I just wanted to clarify my question. Thank you.
Thanks. Would any of the panelists have anything to add on that? Alex, yeah, go ahead.
Well, it's hard to have a conversation. It's about an anti-Zionist Jews. It's hard to have a conversation with fundamentalists without becoming a fundamentalist. But it's good to hear from someone who has the opposite views, because usually they see the problems in your ideology and your views, which you can see because this is your own ideology, and vice versa. It's good to have like the place of, as for me, as for Zionists, the place for anti-Zionist Jews in the state of Israel or not in the state of Israel is that there are people who we should listen to understand ourselves better. And it's vice versa, it works in both ways. So we can see that we're doing something wrong, or they can do as well. That's what I think on that question.
Thanks, Alex. Laura, go for it.
Yeah, so I think the problem is, and therefore I loved what Immanuel said about we can never have other people define what these things mean for us. And that's also what I said a bit at the beginning. What the problem is that the way you described it, Olaf, it is a super reactionary way of saying, how do we have to position ourselves? So evidently there are racists within, or people with racist views within a Zionist spectrum, evidently. Like, why do we even have to identify with them just because we would call ourselves Zionists? That goes a bit into the direction of what Ilya also said. But what the thing is like the way that we are dealing with, we're in the spectrum of having to ping pong in a way, or being a ping pong ball between these different situations there are, or different expectations that are on us. That's what I feel like sometimes, is that, the minute there is a public awareness about a racist incident that is shaped as being a Zionist, formed by a Zionist agenda, that's the second where we feel we have to distance ourselves, and that's all right. But we also need to be aware of it, that it's reactionary, and that it's not, and it's not primarily a self-determined, which is Zionism in itself. It's a matter of self-determination, a self-determined process that we think of when we think of Zionism. It's a reaction to a hostile development that, of course, we have to discuss and we have to be aware of, but it's not really just and that's also the way politics and ideologies evolve. I'm aware of that. We cannot do that without a changing environment. And this is also how it further develops. But at the same time, I think we sometimes over amplify the way that these kinds of things influence our standing and our feeling, especially our feeling towards Zionism. And the second thing that I wanted to say, especially when we talk about anti-Zionist Israelis, I think that is a very special part. I mean, there are even Israelis that are sympathizing with BDS. We know that. So the question is where do they come from? And as much as we might have to acknowledge the personal tragedy that there are Israelis that don't believe in the state of Israel, we need to make sure that those Israelis understand why Zionism for many, not for all, Zionism for many Jews in the diaspora is an important pillar. And that's our job to do. It's not only to say, how do we deal with those anti-Zionist Israelis? So how do they deal with us? That's also an important question. Because at the end of the day, we also have to think about, like, if we understand ourselves also as Europeans in our respective countries, then and we believe in the future and in the present of a diverse Jewish community, not only in Israel, but also abroad, we also need to say, that's on us. We also need to say, we are here, and that's our understanding of Zionism, deal with it. And it's different from yours. And we understand, we respect, we disagree, we maybe not disagree. But first of all, we are here. And this presence has to be acknowledged in all of its spectrum that is sometimes painful. But we shouldn't, I would like to encourage everyone to be a bit less aware, but also a bit less reactionary in the way that we define what Zionism means for us, while acknowledging that we might not agree. And that's still okay, and that's what Zionism was all about from the very beginning.
Thank you, Laura, for that. And we're slowly running out of time here, so perhaps I can go to, pardon me, to Miriam for any final comments.
I feel like, yeah, I agree with a lot that Laura and Olaf said about, like, you know, there needs to be a conversation. If someone is not a Zionist, I also had this conversation with someone that I know that she doesn't consider herself a Zionist, and we had a long conversation about it. And I feel, you know, the main thing is understanding where they come from and where we come from, and also like connecting to what I think Miki asked at the beginning of the panel about, you know, how like the roots and the more philosophical parts of our ideologies. I feel like one important thing is, yes, it's important to look at our roots, and it's also important to see, okay, Hashomer was born in 1913. How does this apply to us now? And now can we like face the new challenges that we have now? And I feel like an important part on updating our ideology, that it does not mean like forgetting where it came from and forgetting its roots. It's also like having conversation with anti-Zionists, whether they're Jews or whether they're not Jews, and where they come from, and understanding it. And like, you know, being a left movement, how can be Zionist? Is Aliyah our response? It means what are our responses to our Zionism and our way of achieving the Zionism that we want to propose as a movement or as a different like organization. So I feel like, you know, it's having this conversation, it's very helpful, first of all, on a personal level, to develop more of ourselves and our personal Zionist identity, but also as a movement, how we face those challenges and how those challenges affect us, and how maybe we start realizing that, you know, we need to change a little bit our ideology and our view of Zionism, because some things we do not agree on, or some things we do agree on. So I feel like it's all about evolution, and evolution of Zionism has come from the 19th century until now, and it will be a process, that hopefully never-ending process on our communities and within ourselves.
Thank you very much for that, Miriam, and thank you everyone as well for all your points and comments. I think that's a great note to finish on there about, you know, we've all had a lot of different opinions and a lot of different contributions here, but certainly one commonality that we've had is the need to engage, the need to widen this conversation as much as possible. And on that note, if you were to follow EUJS on various social media, particularly through our website, eujs.org, you would find our ongoing Theodor I A campaign, the real motivation behind this conversation right now. I think, you know, from a personal point of view, the conversations I've had in the past on Zionism have been very rigid and very narrow, as we've said. But I think this campaign is a real opportunity to challenge the aspects of Zionism that you feel don't represent your views on both sides of the spectrum and all parts of a political spectrum. So on that note, I would encourage you to check out the campaign, and we're promoting we're promoting everyone's blogs on the Times of Israel website. So if you would like to be published, if you have some strong views on Zionism, please do reach out to us, and we'll be happy to pass you on information about how to go about this. So thanks everyone again for joining in on this conversation, and yeah, I wish you Shabbat Shalom, and take care and stay safe.
Thank you. Shabbat Shalom.
Thank you.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, everyone.
Hello, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
Bye bye.
Shabbat Shalom. Thank you. See you soon.